Let's start with a brain teaser. Pretend that you're directing a play and you have two actors who are in the scene. They're facing each other. So character A is facing east and character B is facing west. That's pretty standard, especially if they're talking to each other. So here's the question. If character A is facing east and character B is facing west, if that's one possibility, how many different possibilities are there? And let's just make it simple. I'll give each character only 4 options: north, south, east, or west. Okay, go. And as you think about that for a minute, I'll point out that this is just a common question for beginning directors because most films have scenes like this, or multiple scenes like this. 2 people in a room talking. And the director needs to know all of the possibilities. So, how many possibilities are there? 16. That's right. Every time A faces north, then B has 4 options: north, south, east, or west. And then if A faces east, then B has those same 4 options. 4 options, 4 times, it's 16. And of course, those actors can move around and the dynamic still remains fluid throughout the scene. But in essence, at any given time, in a stage play especially, 2 actors have about 16 options to choose from. And it's the director's responsibility to work with the actors to find the right blocking on the stage for each beat in the scene. That's essentially what blocking is. On a basic level, blocking a scene involves where and when the characters move within the space. And that's what we're going to talk about in this lecture. The intricacies of blocking a good scene, illustrated by the clever and often underrated blocking created by Victor Fleming in the 1939 film The Wizard of Oz. We'll start by identifying a handful of concepts that a director must consider when blocking a scene. And then we'll explore 2 different scenes from Good Will Hunting to see how these concepts can be applied across a series of scenes. And then we'll end by taking a look at a more unconventional way of blocking, exploring some interesting techniques used by John Frankenheimer in the 1962 version of The Manchurian Candidate. And I'll provide you with some ways for you to put your new blocking knowledge to the test when watching other great films. So back to our brain teaser. 2 characters, 1 room, 16 different configuration. But that's if it's theater, because we know where the audience is sitting. But in film, there's a complicating factor: the camera. It's one of the reasons why storyboards were created. Storyboards are drawings of what the camera will capture in a blocked scene. And I want to use some simple storyboards in this lecture to illustrate a lot of these complicated ideas. So for instance, character A is looking east and character B is looking west. Great. Now where's the camera? If the camera is shooting 90 degrees perpendicular to the actors, then the frame might look like this. We call this a 2-person wide shot because we see both people's heads and we see them head to toe, which is wide. But what if we zoomed in or moved the camera closer? Maybe to a 2-person medium shot, meaning both actors from the waist up. Or move the actors closer and move the camera closer. And now we have a 2-person close-up. Both actors, shoulders up. Or split it into 2 shots. Close-up of A looking east, then close-up of B looking west. Or what if we move the camera more parallel to the action? A still looks east and B still looks west, but what if we put the camera, over B's shoulder? That's called an OTS shot, or over the shoulder. And we'd see the back of B's head, and we'd see A head on, maybe in a medium shot, waist up. Or the reverse, zoomed in, OTS of A, close-up of B. With that, we just added half a dozen options to our standard east-west setup, right? And that's not to mention the options associated with camera movements, or whether to put the camera low or to put the camera up high, or how to manipulate the lens to have different layers of focus, or not. Needless to say, there is a lot to think about when it comes to framing and composition. But let's boil it down to some basics, and then we can use storyboards to examine how these basic elements work together in unison. Let's start with the basics. Blocking. Blocking is the way that characters interact in a space. Like actors in a stage play, the actors are blocked by the director. Framing, on the other hand, is the way in which the blocking is captured by the camera. The cinematographer frames the characters once they are blocked. And if we're talking about movies, then blocking would also include the movement of the camera, because the director also has to block the actors and the camera together to achieve the framing or the shots that she wants in a scene. Both framing and blocking can be broken down into the elements of line, shape, and scale. When directors consider the lines in a frame, they consider what's called actual lines and virtual lines. Actual lines are the lines that you can actually see, and virtual lines are lines that are simply implied. Let's look at a storyboard representing a scene from The Wizard of Oz to demonstrate. This is the scene when Dorothy is being welcomed to Oz by the Munchkins, by the Lollipop Guild and the Lullaby League, and their representatives. In this opening shot, notice three things. First, notice that the shape of the Lullaby League and the shape of Dorothy are both the same. The actual lines of the women's skirts make all four of them triangular, but one is larger by far. Second, notice how large Dorothy is in the frame. This is what I mean when I talk about scale. In scale, Dorothy appears larger than the three members of the Lollipop Guild, and rightfully so, because she is not a Munchkin from Oz. She's a human from Kansas. She's larger, and at this point, she doesn't belong. And that's part of the story, right? Dorothy is entering a new land. Land of the little people, land of the Munchkins. But the point of this scene is that Dorothy gets welcomed. She's invited in, and eventually she is accepted by this group. And so it's the role of the director to block the scene in order to demonstrate that acceptance. Let's take a look of how this happens. So number one, the director uses actual lines to create these shapes of triangles, creating a similarity between the triangles of the Munchkins and the triangle of Dorothy. And then number two, he uses scale to differentiate the two. Dorothy's triangle is large in scale, and the Lullaby League's triangles are smaller in scale. And three, he uses virtual lines to accentuate this difference. In this case, the virtual lines are created through eye lines of the characters. Notice how the Lullaby League looks up at Dorothy and how she in turn looks down on them, again highlighting the difference in scale and underlying Dorothy as an outsider. This is then repeated when the Lollipop Guild arrives. But then Victor Fleming, who directed the scene, after the Lollipop Guild arrives, he punches into a medium shot and he changes the height of the camera. He lowers his camera, which raises the horizon line in the background. And by raising this virtual line, he makes these three men appear bigger. By affecting the virtual line and changing the camera angle, Fleming has changed the scale of these three characters, and the audience can start to see the Munchkins as being large on the screen, just as they saw Dorothy as being large in the previous shot, which is a shot we then return to, again making Dorothy seem larger than anyone else around her. But that's about to change. Watch this. As the song ends, two things happen. First, all of the townspeople rush in, they surround Dorothy. And simultaneously, as that happens, the camera rises. And as the camera rises, the horizon line disappears. And by the end of the shot, look, Dorothy appears to be just as tall as everyone else. The virtual lines, the eye lines, they still give Dorothy a dominant position, but the actual lines and their scale have evened out. Dorothy no longer dominates in size, only in the height of the virtual lines. And even that changes in the next frame. In this very next shot, Dorothy is now on equal footing, literally. She's on equal footing with the townspeople. She's been welcomed into the group, and the framing in the scene, even though Dorothy never moved, the framing mirrors the story of the scene. The blocking of the characters and the framing of the camera used line and shape to change Dorothy's scale and her dominance in the frame, which therefore changes her dominance as a character. And by the time the scene ends, Dorothy appears in the same scale as everyone else. As you can see in this wide shot, Dorothy fits right in. Remember, each scene is a small story in and of itself, with a beginning, a middle, and an end. This story can come across in dialogue on the didactic level, or it can come across more subtly on an active or even subconscious level, as was done here through specific character blocking, careful framing, and decisive choices when editing, moving the camera.